Imagine a war-fighting machine so vast that it stands as tall as an Egyptian pyramid, so powerful that it has unlimited range without refueling for decades, and so lethal that it can destroy hundreds of targets in a hostile country every day for a month. Now imagine not one such machine, but 11 of them, because that's how many the U.S. Navy has. They're called supercarriers, large-deck, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, unlike the warships of any other nation. They are in fact the largest warships ever built. The 2018 Defense Appropriations Bill, signed by the President, contains money for constructing a third such vessel in the Gerald R. Ford class, the first new class of supercarriers developed in half a century. Half a century has a special significance for supercarriers because once they join the fleet, they remain on active duty for that long. Other warships don't last anywhere near as long, nor do the vast majority of combat systems in other services. But supercarriers in the Ford and earlier Nimitz class are designed to last that long, meaning that Congress only needs to buy one every 5 years to sustain a fleet of 10. There's discussion at the moment about whether to buy them faster to fashion a fleet of 12. They aren't cheap, especially when you include the cost of their aircraft and escort ships. The estimated cost of construction for the second vessel in the Ford-class lead ships in a new class always cost more than latter ones, is $11.4 billion. As chance would have it, that's almost exactly the amount of money the federal government spends each day. If America ever goes bankrupt due to the quote-unquote burdens of empire, it won't be because it allocated 1 day of spending every 5 years to the construction of a new supercarrier. Nonetheless, there are those who think supercarriers cost too much. Some critics say money could be saved by buying smaller carriers, even though dozens of studies conducted by the Navy over many decades say otherwise. It seems the smaller carriers aren't as versatile or survivable, and yet still need a full complement of escort ships to protect their diminished capabilities. What seldom gets an adequate hearing in such debates is the unique advantages that supercarriers confer on the U.S. as the only nation operating a fleet of such warships. After all, a tactical Ford or Nimitz-class carrier has over 4 acres of flight deck from which to operate diverse craft, manned and unmanned, fixed wing, and rotary wing. That must deliver some pretty special capabilities, whether it's wartime or peacetime, right? Well, yes, it does. Here, to my way of thinking, are the 5 advantages of supercarriers that matter most. A secure military base anywhere it's needed. Supercarriers are in fact military bases equipped with everything they need for sustained air operations. That includes extensive stores of aviation fuel and smart munitions. A Ford-class vessel carries 200% more aviation fuel and 400% more munitions than France's smaller Classe de Gaulle carrier. The Ford class also has an onboard hospital, diverse communication links, and layered protection against attacks, thanks in part to escort vessels. Unlike in the case of a land base, though, no permission is required from local leaders before introducing U.S. forces into a region, and the location of those forces will not be known to enemies because the carrier is constantly moving. A multi-mission air force close to the action. The air wing hosted on each supercarrier typically consists of 4 squadrons of strike aircraft, a dozen planes per squadron, 1 squadron of jamming aircraft for defeating enemy radar and communication, a squadron of radar planes for detecting hostile aircraft and weapon, and various helicopters used in anti-submarine and surface warfare. The Ford class will allow the air wing to execute up to 270 sorties, flights per day, and because each strike aircraft will be equipped with multiple smart weapons, they can precisely destroy many hundreds of aim points in a 24-hour period. Over 80% of global commerce is located within easy reach of U.S. carrier-based aviation. a credible deterrent enemies can't ignore. Nuclear weapons are a fearsome deterrent, but enemies are correct in assuming U.S. leaders would only use them in the most extreme circumstances. That is not the case with the Navy's carrier-based air wings. In a crisis, they would be somewhere near an aggressor nation without that nation's leaders knowing their location, and in a few hours, they could blind and degrade its military forces. Within days, most hostile nations would be effectively disarmed, as hundreds of sites are destroyed. The knowledge that such lethal power lies at the heart of America's global military posture will deter all but the most deluded enemies from undertaking war against the U.S. and its allies. A uniquely versatile tool of diplomacy. The air wing on a supercarrier isn't just lethal, it's versatile. It could be used for everything from battle space dominance to airborne surveillance to enforcement of treaties. The carrier strike group of 8 or more warships is also a visible sign of commitment to friends in a region who may feel threatened. Although quote-unquote gunboat diplomacy got a bad reputation during the colonial era, there are plenty of peaceful purposes that can be served by a supercarrier, such as training the security forces of other nations and bolstering trade ties. The articulated air wings on large-deck carriers can perform several of these missions simultaneously, unlike those on smaller carriers. A signature expression of global reach and power. The U.S. Air Force used to favor, quote-unquote, global reach, global power as its slogan, but abandoned the phrase because it sounded too aggressive. The Navy doesn't need a slogan to highlight the fact that supercarriers make it the most potent military player in most places where they show up. Unlike Air Force tactical aircraft, supercarriers don't need the permission of local warlords to shape regional events or remind distant nations that America has far-flung inserts. Large-deck nuclear-powered aircraft carriers are the preeminent expression of America's role as the world's sole superpower, a concrete manifestation of U.S. military and technological dominance. It's not that there aren't other ways of obtaining the above 5 advantages. It's just that other ways wouldn't be as compelling or cost-effective as a large-deck carrier powered by nuclear reactors, populated by state-of-the-art fighters, and surrounded by warships supporting the world's most advanced air defenses. There's a reason why U.S. presidents think of the Navy's supercarriers every time a crisis breaks out in the Persian Gulf or the Western Pacific. They are the safest, most persuasive way of keeping the peace in an unpredictable world.
spotted the